The first time Silas Brennan saw her, she was standing in the bed of a freight wagon with 3 children clinging to her skirts and a purple bruise blooming across her jaw like spilled ink. He didn't know her name yet. Didn't know she'd walked 40 miles through October cold to escape a dead husband's brother. Didn't know those children hadn't eaten in 2 days, or that the woman's hands were wrapped in torn petticoat fabric to hide rope burns. He only knew that when their eyes met across the timber yard in Greystone Hollow, something in his chest, something he thought had frozen solid years ago, cracked wide open. That was 3 weeks ago. Now, standing in the half-built cabin he'd raised in the shadow of the Blue Ridge, Silas drove the final peg into the doorframe and stepped back. The November wind cut through the pines, carrying the smell of coming snow. He looked at the small structure, for walls, a sound roof, a stone hearth that would hold heat through the hardest winter, and wondered if a woman who'd been beaten down by life would even want what he was about to offer. But he'd made his decision. Tomorrow, he would ask her. 3 weeks earlier, the wagon belonged to Ezra Cole, a freight hauler who made the run between Greystone Hollow and the settlements north. Silas had been loading cut timber when Ezra pulled the team to a halt beside the mill office. "Got a situation, Brennan?" Ezra called down, his weathered face tight with worry. Silas set down the pine beam and walked over, wiping sawdust from his hands. That's when he saw her. She was pale as creek stone, thin in a way that spoke of long hunger, not natural build. Her dark hair was pulled back in a braid that had come half undone. The bruise on her jaw was fresh, maybe a day old. Her dress was plain brown wool, mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches. The children pressed against her like she was the only solid thing in a shaking world. 2 girls, maybe 8 and 5, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 3, his face buried in her skirt. "This is Mrs. Garrett," Ezra said quietly. "Her husband passed 2 months back. His brother took over the homestead, and—" He stopped, his meaning clear in the way his eyes flicked to the bruise. The woman, Mrs. Garrett, lifted her chin. Her eyes were gray, hard as flint, and met Silas's without flinching. "I can work," she said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "I can cook, clean, mend, keep books. I can work a garden and preserve food. I'm not asking for charity. Just a chance to earn our keep until I can find proper employment." Silas had lived alone in these mountains for 7 years. He'd come here after the war, after watching his entire regiment burn in the wilderness, after losing his voice for 2 years from screaming. He'd built a life of silence and solitude, speaking only when necessary, trusting no one, needing no one. He was a big man, 6'4", broad through the shoulders from years of swinging an axe and hauling timber. His hands were scarred, his face weathered, his dark beard shot through with gray though he was only 36. People in Greystone Hollow called him the hermit or the silent man. They respected his work but kept their distance. He preferred it that way, where he had, until this moment. "You know anything about keeping mill records?" he heard himself ask. Mrs. Garrett blinked, surprise cracking through her careful composure. "Yes. My father ran a grain mill in Tennessee. I kept his books from the time I was 12. Silas looked at Ezra, then back at the woman. The little boy peeked out from her skirts, his eyes huge and dark. "Got a cabin behind the mill," Silas said. "Used to be the foreman's quarters before he moved on. It's sound. Needs cleaning, but it'll keep out the cold. You and the children can stay there. In exchange, you keep the mill records and the accounts. I'll pay standard wage, enough to buy food and what you need." He watched hope flare in her eyes, followed immediately by suspicion. "Why?" she asked. Bluntly, Silas met her gaze. "Because I need a bookkeeper, and you need work. That's all." It wasn't all. He didn't know what it was, but it wasn't that simple. Still, he kept his face neutral, his voice flat. Mrs. Garrett studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "We accept." "Good," Silas said. He looked at Ezra. "Help me unload their things." "This is their things," Ezra said quietly, gesturing to 2 small bundles in the wagon bed. Silas felt something hot and sharp move through his chest. He pushed it down and reached up to help the woman and children down from the wagon. When his hand closed around hers, she flinched. He released her immediately, stepping back to give her space. She climbed down on her own, then lifted the children down one by one with careful, practiced movements. The older girl watched Silas with wary eyes. The younger one pressed close to her mother's leg. Cabin's this way, Silas said, and led them toward their temporary refuge. He didn't know yet that temporary would become permanent, or that in 3 weeks' time, he'd be building them a home. The first week, they barely spoke. Silas showed Mrs. Garrett the mill office, a small rough-built room attached to the main timber shed, and the ledgers that had gotten hopelessly tangled over the past year. He explained his system, or lack of one, and left her to it. She worked with fierce, silent concentration, her children playing quietly in the corner with a set of wooden blocks Silas had carved years ago for a purpose he'd long forgotten. By the end of the third day, she'd untangled 6 months of muddled accounts and identified 3 customers who hadn't paid. "Mr. Brennan," she said on the 4th morning, her voice still carrying that hoarse edge, "Patterson's Freight owes you $87. They've been shorting you on every delivery since June." Silas looked up from the saw he was sharpening. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She held out the ledger, her finger tracing the carefully reorganized columns. He studied the numbers, then nodded. "I'll handle it." She handed him a written statement, the charges itemized in precise script. When he took it, their fingers didn't touch. She was careful about that. Always kept distance between them. Always positioned herself near an exit. Always washed his hands. He understood. A woman didn't get a bruise like hers from a man who'd hit her once. That afternoon, he rode into town and collected the debt from Patterson, who blustered and argued until Silas simply stood there, silent and immovable, until the man paid. When Silas returned, he counted out Mrs. Garrett's weekly wage and added an extra $2. "What's this for?" she asked, looking at the coins. "Finding the missing money. That's worth something." Her eyes narrowed. "We agreed on a wage. And on paying you more than we agreed. You got a problem with that?" For the first time, he saw the ghost of a smile touch her mouth. "No, Mr. Brennan. No problem. Silas," he said. "You can call me Silas." She hesitated, then nodded. "Silas, I'm Anna." The second week, the older girl, her name was Ruth, started following him around the timber yard. She didn't speak, just watched him work with solemn eyes. On Saturday, she appeared at his elbow while he was planing a board. "Are you gonna hurt my mama?" she asked. Silas set down the plane and crouched so they were eye level. Ruth didn't step back, which told him she had more courage than fear. "No," he said. "I'm not. Uncle Wesley said he'd take care of us, too." Then he hit Mama when she wouldn't let him into her room. Silas felt his jaw tighten. "Your uncle's not here. And I don't hit women or children. Ever." Ruth studied him with an intensity that reminded him of Anna. "You're really big," she observed. "I know. Mama says big don't mean bad. Your mama's right." Ruth seemed to consider this. Then she said, "The little one's name is Thomas. He doesn't talk much anymore. And my sister's name is Margaret, but we call her Maggie." "That's good to know," Silas said seriously. "Mama cries at night when she thinks we're asleep." Something twisted in Silas's chest. "She's been through a hard time. Are we gonna have to leave?" The question hit him harder than he expected. "Not unless you want to." Ruth nodded slowly, then went back to the cabin. That night, Silas lay awake in his own small house a quarter-mile up the ridge and stared at the rough-hewn ceiling. He thought about a woman crying in the dark, trying to be strong for children who'd already seen too much. He thought about a little boy who'd stopped talking. He thought about the way Anna's hands shook sometimes when she reached for the coffee pot. By morning, he'd made a decision. He rode into Greystone Hollow and bought salt pork, flour, cornmeal, dried apples, and 3 peppermint sticks. When he returned, he left the supplies on the cabin porch and knocked. Anna opened the door, surprise crossing her face. "Silas, thought you could use some extra provisions," he said. "Winter's coming hard." She looked at the supplies, then back at him. "This is too much. It's what I had extra. You'd be doing me a favor. Taking it off my hands before it goes bad." They both knew he was lying. She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her gray eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded and turned to leave. "Silas." He stopped. "Why are you being kind to us?" He thought about the war, about coming back broken and hollow, about 7 years of silence and isolation, about how something in him had woken up the moment he saw her standing in that wagon, battered but unbowed. "Because you deserve kindness," he said. "That's all." The third week, the weather turned bitter. Silas woke before dawn to the first serious snowfall of the season, heavy wet flakes that clung to everything. He dressed quickly and headed down to the mill, arriving just as Anna was trying to coax life into the office stove with frozen hands. "Flu's probably blocked," he said from the doorway. She jumped, pressing a hand to her chest. "You move like a ghost." "Sorry." He crossed to the stove and checked the chimney. Ice had formed in the pipe overnight. He cleared it, rebuilt the fire, and had heat going within minutes. Anna stood back, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. In the growing firelight, he could see her face more clearly. The bruise had faded to yellow-green, but new shadows lived under her eyes. "The cabin roof is leaking," she said abruptly. "Over Thomas's bed. I've been catching the drips in a pot, but I'll fix it today. I can pay for the materials. Out of my wages." "No need. It's my cabin. My responsibility." Her mouth tightened. "I won't be in debt to you, Silas." "You're not. You work for your wages fair and square. The cabin's part of the arrangement. Then I want a contract. Written terms. So we both know where we stand." He studied her. She was afraid, he realized. Afraid of owing him something she couldn't repay. Afraid of being trapped again. "All right," he said. "I'll write it up." By afternoon, he drafted a simple agreement. Employment as bookkeeper, housing provided, standard wage. Either party could end the arrangement with 2 weeks' notice. Anna read it twice, then signed her name in careful script. When she handed the pen back, their fingers brushed. She didn't flinch this time. That night, after fixing the cabin roof and reinforcing the door frame, Silas walked the land behind the mill where the ridge leveled into a natural clearing. Good water from a spring. Protection from the north wind. Room for a garden. He paced out the dimensions of a house in his mind, then went home and began to draw plans by lamplight. The morning Silas began building the cabin, Anna found him at first light with an axe over his shoulder and a determined set to his jaw. "What are you doing?" she asked, breath misting in the November cold. "Building something," he said, and started felling timber. She watched him work for a full minute, then said, "Silas Brennan, if you're building what I think you're building, we need to talk." He sank the axe into a stump and turned to face her. "Then let's talk." They stood in the clearing, the smell of fresh-cut pine sharp in the air. Anna wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from something harder to name. "I can't accept this," she said. "Haven't offered you anything yet. You're building a house. I'm building a house on my land. What I do with it after is my business." Her eyes flashed. "Don't play games with me. I've had enough of men who say one thing and mean another." Silas took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "You're right. I'm building this for you and the children. Not as charity. Not to put you in my debt. Because—" He stopped, the words harder than he expected. "Because you deserve a real home. And because I'd like to give you my name, if you'll have it." Anna went very still. "You're asking me to marry you." "I am. You've known me 3 weeks. I've known you long enough to see you're the strongest person I've ever met. Long enough to see how you love those children. Long enough to know I don't want to go back to living alone. You don't know me," she said, but her voice shook. "You don't know what I've been through. What they—" She stopped, her hands curling into fists. Silas closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to move away. She didn't. "I know your husband died and his brother tried to claim you like property," he said quietly. "I know you walked 40 miles to get away from him. I know you've got rope burns under those bandages and a bruise that tells me he hit you hard enough to knock you down." He paused. "I know you're afraid. And I know I'm asking you to trust me when you got no reason to trust any man." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because the day you stepped down from that wagon, something in me woke up that I thought was dead. Because your daughter asked me if I was going to hurt you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving the answer is no. Because," his voice roughened, "because I've been alone a long time, Anna. And I don't want to be alone anymore." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the size and the scars to the man underneath. "I can't be a proper wife," she whispered. "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I can't. I'm not ready for—" "I'm not asking for that," Silas said firmly. "I'm asking you to let me build you a home. Let me give you and the children my name so no one can touch you. We'll have separate rooms." He set the pace for everything else. "If all we ever are is 2 people raising children under the same roof, that's enough for me." Anna pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. When she lowered them, tears tracked down her cheeks. "I'm broken, Silas." "No," he said. "You're bent. There's a difference. And bent things can straighten out, given time and care. She laughed, a small broken sound. You talk like a man who knows. I came back from the war not able to speak for 2 years, he said. Watched my whole regiment burn. Couldn't save any of them. Came up here because I couldn't stand to be around people anymore. He met her eyes. I understand broken, Anna. And I understand healing. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the promise of snow. Anna looked at the cleared ground, at the stacked timber, at this massive gentle man who was offering her something she'd stopped believing existed. If I say yes, she said slowly, I need your word. Your absolute word. That you'll never raise a hand to me or the children. That if I say no to anything, you'll respect it. That the first time you break that promise, I can take the children and leave, and you won't stop me. You have my word, Silas said. I'll put it in writing if you want. I want. Then you'll have it. Anna took a shuddering breath. Then yes, I'll marry you. Relief flooded through him, but he kept still, letting her process. One more thing, she said. I want to help build the house. I want to know every nail, every board. I want to build my own home with my own hands. Silas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. I'd be honored. They were married in the Greystone Hollow Church on a cold December morning with Ezra Cole and the mill foreman as witnesses. Anna wore a simple gray dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Silas had bought. The children stood beside them, Ruth holding Thomas's hand, Maggie clutching a small bouquet of dried flowers. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Silas didn't kiss her. He simply took her hand and held it gently, a promise made without words. The house was finished by February. It had 4 rooms, a main living area with the stone hearth Silas had built, 2 bedrooms for Anna and the children, and a small room for Silas. Wide windows to let in light. A covered porch that wrapped halfway around. A root cellar dug deep to keep food through the hardest winters. The night they moved in, Anna stood in the main room and slowly turned in a circle, taking it in. The children were already exploring, their voices echoing with an excitement Anna hadn't heard in months. It's beautiful, she whispered. Silas stood in the doorway, watching her. It's yours. Deeds in your name. If anything happens to me, the house and the land are yours free and clear. She turned to look at him, tears bright in her eyes. You didn't have to do that. I wanted you to know you're safe. That no one can take this from you. Anna crossed the room and, for the first time, reached out to touch his hand. He went very still, letting her take the lead. Thank you, she said, for giving me back my life. You never lost it, Silas said quietly. You just needed a safe place to remember who you are. That spring, Anna planted a garden that sprawled across the sunny south side of the house. Ruth helped her, learning the names of seeds and the rhythm of the seasons. Maggie picked wildflowers and filled the house with color. And Thomas, slowly, carefully, began to speak again. The first word he said was, Papa, looking up at Silas with complete trust. Silas had to step outside and stand in the April rain for a long time after that. It was late summer, nearly a year after Anna had arrived, when she found Silas splitting wood behind the house. She watched him work, the easy power in his shoulders, the care he took stacking the split logs, and felt something shift in her chest. He looked up, saw her watching, and set down the axe. Something wrong? No, Anna said. She walked closer, her heart beating hard. I wanted to tell you something. He waited, patient as always. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. Of you. Of this. She gestured between them. I'm not saying I'm completely healed, but I'm not broken either. Not anymore. Silas's expression softened. Anna. She stepped closer and took his hand, properly this time, their fingers intertwining. I know we said separate rooms, and I know you've been patient beyond anything I deserved, but I don't want separate anymore, Silas. I want a real marriage. With you. He searched her face. You're sure? I'm sure. He pulled her close, gently, giving her every chance to change her mind. When she leaned into him, resting her head against his broad chest, he wrapped his arms around her and held her like she was something precious. I love you, he said quietly. Have since the day you climbed down from that wagon and looked at me like you'd fight the whole world if you had to. Anna tilted her head back to look at him. I love you too. You gave me everything. A home, your name, your patience. You gave me back myself. When he kissed her, it was soft and careful and full of promise. The children found them like that, standing in the sunlight, holding on to each other like two people who'd finally found their way home. Years later, when Ruth was grown and preparing to leave for the teaching position in Charlottesville, she asked her mother what she remembered most about those early days. Anna looked out at the land, at the house Silas had built, at the life they'd carved from hardship and hope. I remember thinking I'd lost everything, she said. And then I remember the day I realized I'd found everything that mattered. Not because a man saved me, I saved myself, but because I found a partner who understood that broken things can heal, given time and care and love. She smiled. Your father gave me a home. But more than that, he gave me the space to become myself again. And that's the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. In the house behind them, Silas was teaching Thomas and Maddie's children how to carve wooden toys, his deep voice rumbling with laughter. Anna watched him through the window, her heart full, and thought about the terrified woman who'd arrived with nothing but bruises and 3 frightened children. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, not because the hard things hadn't happened, but because she'd survived them and built something beautiful on the other side. She'd arrived with nothing, and she'd been given everything that mattered: safety, partnership, and a love that had grown slowly, carefully, into something unbreakable. The mountain would remember their story long after they were gone. The silent man who'd built a home, and the battered woman who'd had the courage to walk through the door.